3 decades as a coach, a teacher. He's a Hall of Fame wrestling coach, an author, and he joins us now on episode 40 of the Masters in Coaching podcast. Let's go! Well, welcome into episode number 40 of our Masters in Coaching podcast here on iHeartRadio, YouTube, wherever you may be watching and listening to both components of our interview this week. We are so glad that you joined us, and we are excited to welcome in our guest. 29 years at Santa Ana High School as a teacher and wrestling coach, compiled over 400 wins, coached 36 individual CIF champions, 56 state qualifiers, 18 state place winners. He's coached 2 national champion wrestlers. One of his former wrestlers went on to fight for the UFC, an analyst for ESPN. He's been named the Santa Ana Unified School District Teacher of the Year, semifinalist for the Orange County Teacher of the Year Award. He's a 2-time recipient of the California State Coaches Wrestling Award. He's inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame back in 2014, and he's been involved with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes since 1992. And he's got a great book that we're going to get into called A Saint in This City. He is Scott Glabb, and he joins us now here on the Masters in Coaching podcast. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I enjoy doing these. Thanks, Tim.
Did I get everything in? You've had a long, illustrious career coaching and teaching. That's a mouthful, but man, you've been super successful, and we just appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, I've been really blessed. This was Southern California was the last place I ever wanted to end up living in or working in. So it's definitely been life-changing, and I had a lot of great success at Santa Ana High School.
All right, we got a lot to get into to
Sure.
cover your career, your teaching and coaching, get into what your involvement with Concordia University, Irvine. You've been there since 2011, and you've created a new class that you teach, and you teach multiple classes there. So we're getting into that. We're going to get into the book as well. I know it's very successful and great. Let's just get into you and how does a guy from the Pacific Northwest end up in Santa Ana, California?
Well, I graduated from Eastern Washington University, Cooper Cup. And I got out and I went back to my old high school, and my dream was to teach and coach where I went to school. And I went back and I substitute taught, and I volunteered coach. And then the opening came up for a head wrestling coach, and my old high school coach, recommended me, and I thought this was it. I'm going to fulfill my dream here. And they didn't hire me. I was young. I was 23, 24 years old. Mm-hmm. Back, I understand they hired somebody that they said paid their dues. And so I was a little bit lost at the time. And I was also going through depression. I was dealing with some really tough self-image issues, and then not having a purpose. I ended up being admitted into a psychiatric care unit on a 5150. And a 5150 is when you're a danger to yourself or somebody else. And spent a few days there, and when I got out, I realized, hey, I've either got to turn things around or just end it all. And I had a girlfriend that lived down here in Southern California. She was in Orange County, and she just said, hey, what do you got to lose? And I had a sister that was living down here, and she was right. What do I have to lose? I didn't have any other opportunities in Washington. No other jobs were opening up. When I applied, I wasn't getting interviews. So, I ended up moving to the place I dreaded most, Southern California, and just kind of rode my bike around during the day looking for work. This is pretty sad. I brought a snow cone machine with me, and I ended up selling snow cones out in front of stores just to make a few bucks. So here's 2 college degrees and a dream of being a coach and a teacher, and I'm out selling snow cones to strangers just to make a few bucks. So times were pretty rough when I got to Southern California. And then I picked up a job at Marina High School for a couple years. And during that whole time, I was working through my depression. I was getting some counseling. I was taking some things personal. And it just didn't seem like it was a good fit for me at Marina. So I quit. And then the athletic director at Marina goes, well, Santa Ana High School is looking for a wrestling coach. I go, Santa Ana? I don't even like driving through Santa Ana, let alone work in Santa Ana. But I had no other options, no other opportunities. And I went in and shook hands with the athletic director, and he said, you're hired. And I said, you didn't ask me any questions. And he said, nobody else applied for the job. you're it. And so I'm wondering, what's going on here that I don't know about. So that's kind of how I ended up at Santa Ana.
So you're there for 29 years. You're teaching and coaching, and you're coaching wrestling. Do you have a wrestling background? Was that something when you decided, hey, I want to go teach and I got my degrees and, I'm trying to figure out my life, coaching was going to be something that you were going to continue to do, right?
I wrestled through high school, and at 16, I remember in the wrestling room, I decided I wanted to be a teacher and a coach. I also in college at Pacific University in Forest Grove, Oregon. I was there for a couple years. It was a pretty strong NAIA school, and transferred to Eastern Washington University and finished up wrestling there, and even coached up there for a year. So wrestling, I didn't have a father growing up. My parents were divorced. He wasn't around. He didn't spend a lot of time with me. So wrestling kind of gave me that community, that family, the coaches to look up to, like father figures. So it really kind of gave me something to latch onto, that to fill that void that I didn't have with my relationship with my father.
Do you think, Scott, that background that you had and going to wrestling as that outlet is maybe something that you were drawn to Santa Ana for because of the students at that school, maybe some of their backgrounds and going through life at that time for them individually? You were that right person who's lived it, done it, felt it, know what it's like, and now you can pour into these kids at that time.
Absolutely. I think it was just all part of the big plan, God's plan. He is just, I think a lot of what I went through, the depression, being suicidal, not having a father around. My father was an alcoholic, ended up getting involved in drugs. I think all that kind of prepared me and got me ready to walk into Santa Ana High School, because those problems that I just mentioned, along with hundreds of others I was faced with. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to explain to other people, hey, this is what's going on when you're not growing up, in a middle class or upper middle class area. You don't realize the real issues kids are dealing with, and they're still showing up every day, going to school and walking out on that wrestling mat when they're fighting their own matches at home or in the streets. So yeah, absolutely. That experience definitely helped me.
Scott Glabb is joining us here, episode 40 of the Masters in Coaching podcast. Longtime teacher, coach, Hall of Fame coach in wrestling at Santa Ana High School. All right, you take over the program, Scott. What was it like when you took over? What was the state of the program at that time?
The state of the program, they only brought in like football coaches to coach. There wasn't anybody in that program that was really there that had a passion for the sport. It was just, you're picking and choosing different guys in the building that, hey, you're coach wrestling this year. Now you're going to coach wrestling. And they had a few walk-on coaches. Nobody that really had a passion or a love for the sport, from what I remember. It was a mess, to be honest with you. I had about 30 kids. And I didn't understand the Hispanic culture. I'm a corn-fed white boy from Washington, and I get down here, and I'm getting excuses like, I've got to go interpret for my mom at the doctor, and I've got to go pay the phone bill. And it's like, why does your mom need you to go to the doctor with her? And why can't you just put a check in the mail instead of walking to pay the bills? And so there was a lot to learn. There was a lot for me to understand how that culture worked. And because I had a certain way of thinking, and you show up to practice every day and you put 100% in, and there are no excuses. And it wasn't like that at all. It was totally the opposite.
Did it take some time to adjust for you at that point? Did you have to adjust to them and they had to adjust to you?
Yeah, well, I had to adjust to them first. I had to start being a little bit more lenient and understand the circumstances that I was dealing with and all the excuses. These kids would show up, but they just had a lot of things going on in their life that kind of took them away from practice, or they couldn't practice the whole time that we were there. Luckily, we had a 6-period athletic period, so they would all show up for that. But then, of course, the excuses would start. For instance, we would have a 2-day tournament, and Friday they all showed up to go wrestle at the tournament. We got smashed. Then Saturday rolls around, and we got to get up at 6 a.m, and half the team's gone. And I go, where is everybody? Where did everybody go? Oh, Glabb, they only wanted to go on Friday because they got out of school to go wrestle. And so it's like, oh, that's got to change, because showing up with half a team, you need 14 guys, and when you're showing up with 7, it's impossible to win any kind of dual meet. So yeah. And then we had the perception of being thugs, thieves, vandals. They were recognized for going into schools and breaking into lockers and vandalizing things. We had a really poor reputation. And so it was really difficult to be invited to wrestling tournaments because of that reputation.
How long did it take to then get that program turned around, maybe get the kids focused, coming back on Saturdays for 2-day meets, start winning and changing that reputation for the Santa Ana wrestling team?
So this is kind of a miracle. It took probably about a year.
Okay.
So I started getting them to show up for those 2-day tournaments. What you have to do when you're coaching in Santa Ana is you got to get on the phone. You got to start calling kids at 6:37 in the morning to get them to show up that morning to get, and if need be, I was sending coaches out to go pick those kids up at home. I didn't believe there's a lot of the philosophy that, well, if they're not here, then they don't want to go. Well, maybe they're not here because they don't have a parent at home to wake them up, or maybe they're not home because they don't have an alarm clock, or maybe they don't have a ride. So you got all those things into consideration. So I was pretty hands-on when it came to tracking these kids down. And if I had to go to their house and knock on their door and find out why they haven't been showing up, then that's what I would do. But we were like 11 and 16 my first year. We beat teams similar to ours. And then the following year we were 26-3. So I'm going, holy cow. Huntington Beach High School beat us 76-0 my first year, and then beat us by 6 my second year, and then the third year we beat them. And it just, from that third year on, when we won league, we had won 26 league title. We won a league title every year until I retired. So it was just, I don't know. It's hard to explain how it just kept continuing to be a success.
There's a lot, as you just talked about, that goes into maintaining a program, to building a program, and then to win as a program. And not to say that winning's the win all be all here, but winning helps kind of fix things and kind of helps, like, okay, hey, it's worth getting up now. It's worth putting in the extra effort. And hey, I'm going to get all my stuff done I need to, but I'm going to make sure I get my butt to wrestling practice and make sure I get to the meets. Did winning help that? Did you notice after that year one where you guys, year two, were winning and winning again and again and again? Did that help the program, help the kids?
Oh yeah. I mean, at the time, the football team was winning a little bit, but other than that, the school was really struggling in the early 90s with wins, because we were in the Sunset League. So we're in there with Edison and Huntington and Ocean View and Marina, some really tough schools in Orange County. So absolutely, winning does help. They have a little pride, tradition. And once that got going, more and more kids would come out. I got up to 125 kids one year.
Wow.
Yeah. And once the word spreads and people realize you're winning, I think the most important part was people realized I cared, that I loved those boys. I forgave them. It was easy for me to forgive them, whether they stabbed me in the back once, 2 times, 3 times. I gave kids second and third chances that would quit, and then they wanted to come back. I just like the coaching program being transformational and trying to change lives and make a difference. And, we got all these rules as coaches and we want to follow all these rules. And if you don't follow the rules, you're off the team. But that kind of stuff doesn't work. And when kids realize, I got a quote, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. And I think when those boys realized, hey, this guy isn't walking out of our life. This man's sticking around. And I was consistent every day and I followed through. And one of the biggest things I tried to teach them is to be a man of your word. If you make your yes be yes and your no be no. So there's a lot of those little mantras that I would have to throw in there and try to get them to buy into. And so you have to be a pretty good salesman too.
Not only you're a coach, but you were a father figure for a lot of these kids, pouring into them on and off the mat, but making them turn from boys into men and grow up and be accountable and take responsibility for things, which is part of coaching. And I think some people get into coaching and may not understand that is part of it. It's not just going out and doing X's and O's and holding a 2-hour practice and going out and trying to get W's. And at the end of the year, see what your record is and what the awards are going to be. It's building these kids' characters. It's building these kids and holding them up and holding them accountable. And that's
Yes.
awesome. And you did it in a sport that isn't football, isn't baseball, isn't basketball, but wrestling. You had 125 kids come out one year. I'm blown away by that.
Yeah, well, it was like I was over 100 for about 10, 15 years. Over 100 kids would come out.
Wow.
It was really difficult to manage, but I just, hey, you know, I got a bigger impact, a larger influence. The more kids that come out, the larger the influence a coach can have. So, you know, in wrestling, there are no cuts. And they cut themselves. It's such a tough sport. It's so demanding, and we were a year-round program. I expected them to wrestle in the spring and the summer, in the fall. They worked hard, and so, you know, eventually those kids would cut themselves that didn't think it was going to be a fit for them.
Since 2011, you've been a professor at the Masters in Athletics and Coaching Administration program at Concordia University, Irvine. And since then, you've taught classes. You actually created a class there, the faith-based coaching class there in the Masters program. Talk a little bit about your involvement, how you got involved, and why you felt like you needed to create a class outside of the wrestling class on the faith-based coaching.
So I was a student there from 2007 to 2009. I needed a master's. I needed to go up on the pay scale. I mean, hey, this is a perfect fit. A master's in coaching, athletic administration. Maybe someday I want to be an athletic director. It was a great fit. And back then it was all in person. And it was fun going to the classes and meeting other coaches. And so after I was almost finished up, Tom White came up and he says, "Glabb, you're going to be teaching after you." Okay. And so I started off with the wrestling class, and those were in person in the summer, and then they moved to online. And then I went to, I've been involved with Fellowship of Christian Athletes for a long time and have a real good relationship with the guys in charge around here. And so I went out to a 3-dimensional coaching workshop in Missouri where FCA is based. I was really inspired at that workshop to come back and try to develop a class that had the concepts and ideals of the 3-dimensional coach. And 3-dimensional coaching is most coaches coach fundamentals, like you said, the X's and O's, and then coaches coach the mind, which is motivation, but only 5% of coaches coach the heart. That's building relationships. So I decided to come back and use some of those elements from 3-dimensional coaching and some of the stuff I learned, and develop a class called faith-based coaching, and how to insert your faith as a coach, how to be a servant leader, you know, how to care about kids, how to build those relationships, why those relationships are important. And then for the most part, if you do that, the winning will come. And if the winning doesn't come, the relationships are lifetime. I love my alumni. I love my Santa Ana alumni. I love getting together and going out to eat with them. I love just hanging out with them and being invited to things and barbecues and weddings, et cetera. So it really explains, after you've done your 30 years of coaching and then they all come back and still want to keep in touch with you. It really touches you and helps you realize as a coach that, you know, I did what I was supposed to do, make an impact. And
that's funny. You're describing that. And I think back to my coaches in high school. We're going back 25, 26 years at John Burroughs High School in Burbank. And a baseball coach who I still text with a couple of days ago, who's now the athletic director at that high school, and just kind of communicate with about things happening, whether it's just sports or just things happening in life. And then I think of other coaches I've had that, you know, didn't invest in me and didn't put that effort into building a relationship on and off the field that I don't talk to anymore. And I look back at it, it's like they didn't do much for me. I didn't, you know, outside of yelling a lot and demanding a lot of things on the field, they didn't really care about me much more than that. And I think about my baseball coach who did. And you're right. The more you can pour in with the heart on the field and off the field, it's something I think coaches don't understand. And some of them, it may take a few years for young coaches to figure that, because they're so locked in. And like, my first head coaching job, I want to win. I want to beat this other team. I want to be successful. I want to be the coach of the year, that they put all the other stuff aside for the kids.
Right. I put all my self-worth in winning too when I first got to Santa Ana, because I wanted to fit into the Orange County culture here, and that wasn't happening. And so this is how I remember it. The Lord spoke to me one day and said, "You're never going to win at Santa Ana, so invest time in these kids." And I thought to myself, well, I became a Christian at 13 years old. It worked for me. So why not? I got the FCA going, started sending the FCA camp, raising money to take them there and, getting them to church and retreats. And then it was like, wow, it just kind of total flip. Everything just flipped. So for me, it was like, I got to keep that focus. I got to keep those relationships. I can't get focused on winning because I think it'll be taken away from me once I quit investing in kids.
All right, Scott, talk a little bit about A Saint in This City, the book. When did you start with the idea of writing a book? How long did it take? Where can people find it? And I know Jay Moore, our good friend, comedian and wrestling coach, fully endorses it as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, and I had a lot of people go, hey, you got good stories. You ought to write a book. You ought to write a book. And then I'm thinking, I don't want any regrets. So I don't want to be like 75 sitting in my rocking chair going, man, I should have wrote a book. So I got started about 2003 and then I got discouraged about 2009. I was getting discouraged and I just thought, who's going to want this and who's going to read it? And then I went to the NCAAs and some guy was selling a book. It was a nonfiction and it was called Nearfall. And I read through it and I go, if this guy can do it, then I can do it. And so I got motivated again and hammered it out and got it first published in 2010 through a company out of Oklahoma, but then they went bankrupt and they weren't paying our royalties to us. So in 2018, I had to start all over again and redo the whole book. And I added chapters about girls wrestling because girls wrestling has taken off and we had 2 girls win state titles. So I did a couple chapters on them because those girls had just as much adversity and hardships as the boys. So I did a couple chapters on them. I just want, like I said earlier, I want people in the Midwest, people that are playing sports somewhere or wrestling somewhere, understand that, like my sons, they don't get how hard it is for some of these boys to grow up. They don't get that they're barely making ends meet. They're struggling. And there's one boy on my son's team. I retired from Santa Ana and went over to the Costa Mesa to help out over there. And there's one kid on our team who has to pour water in the toilet every time he uses it. And he hasn't had a fridge for 3 or 4 years. And, sleeps in the same bed with his mom because it's a studio apartment. That's the kind of stuff that people don't understand. Yet this kid gets up every day, he goes to school, and he comes to practice and he works hard. So that's kind of why I wrote the book. And I want other people to be a saint in their city. I want to see other educators and coaches mentor these kids, invest in these kids, build relationships, just pour into them. And in the back of the book, I have letters from kids about what the sport has done for them and how the sport of wrestling helped and what some of their circumstances were in situations. But that's basically what I wanted to do, is just let people know things are a lot different, in the inner city and urban areas for kids.
Outside of teaching at Concordia, and you said you're helping out at Costa Mesa, what else are you up to now? After 29 years of teaching and coaching, you do deserve a little downtime.
Well, I was so worried about downtime that I took on way too many things. I was doing the Concordia thing. I'm doing that. And then I sub at my son's school sometimes so I can keep tabs on him. There's 2 of them there. One plays baseball, one wrestled. And I'm a commissioner in the city of Costa Mesa. I applied for that job. And so I have that, and just on a couple other committees. I'm on the athletic council at Vanguard University because they started a wrestling program. And I helped them find a coach, and they're starting girls wrestling here pretty soon. So I'm keeping pretty busy. I have to say no to a few things now.
Well, 3+ decades coaching, teaching. You're a Hall of Famer. You continue to do great work with the young folk, and we thank you so much for joining us here on our 40th episode of the Masters in Coaching podcast. Scott, thank you so much. Continued success.
I forgot, you asked me where to find the book. It's on Amazon. You can just go to Amazon, type a Saint in the City in, and it should pop up there on Amazon. It's an ebook and a paperback, and I'm working on audio right now. So
perfect.
I appreciate you having me on, and I love sharing this story, and hopefully maybe it can inspire some of these young coaches, like you said, to kind of, turn the corner a little bit and start focusing on their athletes.
Well, I'm convinced this is going to be a Disney movie in a few years.
That's another podcast. A bunch of that stuff already.
Have you thought about, Scott, who's going to play you?
Oh, man. Jack Black.
That's great. That's great. Scott, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us and continued success.
All right. Take care. Thank you.